October 15th, 1976, approximately 2 in the morning. A two-story brick house sits at the end of a cul-de-sac on Club Drive in Massapequa, Long Island, overlooking the Great South Bay. Marble statues line the front lawn, his one visible indulgence. Inside, the house is quiet. Carlo Gambino is in bed. He'd spent the evening watching the New York Yankees beat the Kansas City Royals to clinch the American League pennant. The television is off. His heart, the organ that shielded him from deportation hearings, federal indictments, and immigration agents for 2 straight decades, is failing. It has been failing for years. He takes 30 pills a day for what he once described to an FBI agent while eating grapefruit and English muffins at a Lower Manhattan eatery as his degenerate heart. He's 74 years old. A priest arrives and administers last rites. And then Carlo Gambino dies, in his own bed, in his own home, surrounded by family, having never served a meaningful day in prison. The boss of the largest and most powerful mafia family in the history of the United States leaves the world the way almost no boss ever has, on his own terms in his own time, untouched. An FBI memo from the New York field office to the director, dated October 19th, noted the death with bureaucratic terseness and added a bitter editorial comment that it was ironic Gambino received a funeral mass, given that he probably would have rolled dice for Christ's clothing if present at the crucifixion. Everyone knows the name, Gambino. It's the name of the most famous crime family in America. It's the shadow behind the Godfather. It's shorthand for mafia power at its absolute peak. What almost nobody knows is how Carlo Gambino actually did it, not the crimes. Does not the family tree, not the Hollywood mythology, but the specific mechanics of how one man defeated the FBI, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, the federal court system, and every prosecutorial tool the United States government possessed for over half a century. The mainstream account treats his freedom as a footnote, a lucky break, an unexplained mystery. It wasn't luck. It wasn't a mystery. It was a system built on behavioral discipline so extreme that FBI agents once recorded him communicating with an associate for 2 years without either man speaking a single word. 2,100 pages of declassified FBI files on Carlo Gambino exist. They contain more evidence of the Bureau's failure than of Gambino's crimes. That gap between what the government knew and what it could prove is the real story. And it starts in a neighborhood on the outskirts of Palermo that had been breeding men like Carlo Gambino for 100 years before he was born. He came from Passo di Rigano, a district on the western edge of the city that had been a Cosa Nostra stronghold since the 19th century. His father was Tommaso Gambino. His mother was Felice Castellano, and that surname would echo across decades of American organized crime. That because the Castellano family was embedded in the Sicilian Mafia on both sides of the Atlantic. The Gambinos belonged to the Passo di Rigano Mandamento, a federation of clans including the Uditore and Torretta families, later linked to the Inserillo and Menino clans, families that would feature prominently in the transatlantic heroin trade and the pizza connection case of the 1980s. As recently as 2019, a joint FBI-Italian police operation confirmed continuing links between Passo di Rigano Cosa Nostra and the Gambino crime family in New York, nearly a century after Carlo left. His actual date of birth was September 1st, 1902, recorded in volume 450, entry 3255 of Palermo's civil registry in the 2nd official district. Without the widely repeated date of August 24th, comes from fraudulent naturalization papers Gambino filed in 1923. By his late teens, Carlo was already a made member of the honored society in Sicily, reportedly working as an enforcer for Vito Cascioferro, the legendary Sicilian Mafia boss. He had 3 brothers, Gaspare, who stayed out of organized crime entirely, and Paolo and Giuseppe, who would both follow him to America and eventually serve as captains in his family. He fled during the early tremors of Mussolini's crackdown on the Mafia. In November of 1921, he climbed aboard the SS Vincenzo Florio, an Italian cargo freighter, and hid himself among crates of lemons, olive oil, and Marsala wine. According to John H. Davis's Mafia Dynasty, he ate nothing but anchovies and wine during the month-long crossing. He arrived at Norfolk, Virginia, on December 23, 1921, a stowaway. This was definitively established by the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit in Gambino versus INS 419 F. 2nd, 1355, decided in 1970. Gambino himself later claimed in his declaration of intention to naturalize that he had arrived at New York Harbor on December 25th aboard the same vessel, a lie that would haunt his legal battles for the rest of his life. The Castellano relatives from his mother's side met him at the dock and drove him to a rented apartment on Navy Street near the Brooklyn waterfront. By the 1930 census, he was living on East 182nd Street in the Bronx, listed as a real estate agent with his wife Katerine, daughter Phyllis, son Thomas, and brother Paul. He was 19 years old when he arrived, illegal and already a mafioso. He'd never go back to Sicily. His early criminal career was built on Prohibition liquor. His uncle and future father-in-law, Frank Castellano, ran a faction within the D'Aquila crime family. Carlo drove trucks loaded with bootleg alcohol, manufactured moonshine and basement stills, smuggled rum from the Caribbean, and persuaded speakeasy owners to accept exclusive distribution. A United States Treasury Alcohol Tax Unit memo dated November 16, 1934, the earliest known federal document mentioning him, identified a notorious and daring group of bootleggers known as the Gambino Outfit, naming Carlo, his brother Paul, and their cousin Anthony as the principal members. On December 5, 1926, he married his first cousin Catherine Castellano at St. Rosalia's Church in Brooklyn. She was 19. His brother Paolo served as witness. Now, Catherine was the sister of Paul Castellano, the man Carlo would eventually choose to succeed him, binding 2 mafia dynasties into a single bloodline. Their marriage produced 4 children: Phyllis, born September 22, 1927, Thomas, born around 1929, Carlo Jr., and Joseph, born March 28, 1936. He bought fruit from street vendors in his Gravesend neighborhood. He ate grapefruit for breakfast. Mirty offered FBI agents coffee and dessert at his home before they took him in for booking. He lived at 2230 Ocean Parkway in the Gravesend section of Brooklyn, a 2-story multi-family house built in 1935, approximately 2,700 square feet on a 4,300 square foot lot. 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms. Nothing about it suggested the home of the most powerful criminal in the Western Hemisphere. His only visible vanity was his Buick's license plate, CG1. The Castella Marise War between Joe Masseria and Salvatore Marenzano reshaped the New York underworld between 1929 and 1931. Gambino joined the circle of ambitious young mobsters: Lucky Luciano, Albert Anastasia, Vito Genovese, Frank Costello, Tommy Lucchese, Joe Adonis, Meyer Lansky, Bugsy Siegel, who saw both old bosses as obstacles to modernization. On April 15, 1931, not Masseria, was gunned down at Nuova Villa Tamaro on Coney Island. Maranzano declared himself boss of all bosses and reorganized the gangs into 5 families. 5 months later, on September 10th, Maranzano himself was killed, and Luciano established the Commission, the governing body that would shape the Mafia for the next half-century. Gambino was placed in the Mangano family under Vincent Mangano, with Anastasia as underboss. He rose to capo regime in the 1930s and made a fortune after Prohibition ended by buying distillery equipment at fire sale prices and expanding illegal liquor production. His one documented brush with incarceration came in 1937, a conspiracy charge for operating an illegal million-gallon distillery in Philadelphia. United States District Court, Eastern District of Pennsylvania, indictment number 7609, before Judge George Welsh. Prati was sentenced to 22 months at the United States Penitentiary in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, plus a $2,500 fine. But FBI files reveal a critical detail. Gambino was committed to Lewisburg on May 23, 1939, and released on bail on May 27th, 4 days later, pending appeal. A January 21, 1941 letter informed the penitentiary that judgment was reversed and a new trial ordered. But the outcome of that new trial doesn't appear in surviving records. Whether he served the full 22 months or only 4 days remains a genuinely disputed fact. And it matters, because on that ambiguity rests the entire claim that Carlo Gambino never spent meaningful time behind bars. During the war years, he made enormous profits from ration stamp rackets, bribing officials at the Office of Price Administration for stamps he resold on the black market. He invested the proceeds into legitimate businesses, restaurants, bakeries, factories, meat markets, olive oil importers, trucking companies, and pizza parlors. By the late 1940s, he was among the richest members of the family. On April 19, 1951, Philip Mangano was found shot dead near Sheepshead Bay, Brooklyn. His brother Vincent vanished the same day and was never found. Albert Anastasia, almost certainly responsible for both, seized control of the family. Gambino maneuvered himself into the role of consigliere, then underboss, after the assassination of Frank Scalise at a Bronx fruit stand on June 17, 1957. He was Anastasia's second in command, and he was already building the alliance that would put him in the only chair that mattered. Anastasia had been unraveling for years. In March of 1952, he had ordered the murder of Arnold Schuster, a 24-year-old clothing salesman who'd helped police capture bank robber Willie Sutton. Anastasia had seen Schuster on television and, according to multiple informant accounts, snarled that he couldn't stand squealers and wanted the man dead. The killing of a civilian violated a rule the Mafia enforced with lethal seriousness. Don't touch civilians, don't generate headlines, don't bring heat. Then Anastasia was also selling memberships in the family for $40,000 to $50,000 apiece, a gross breach of protocol that enriched the boss while cheapening the organization, and had encroached on Meyer Lansky's gambling interests in Cuba without commission approval. Gambino forged an alliance with Vito Genovese, who wanted to be boss of all bosses. The deal was straightforward. Genovese would sanction Anastasia's removal, and Gambino would take the family. On the morning of October 25, 1957, at approximately 10:20, Albert Anastasia walked into Grasso's barbershop inside the Park Sheraton Hotel at 877th Avenue and 56th Street in Midtown Manhattan. He sat in chair number 4. His barber, Joseph Buccino, placed hot towels over his face. His bodyguard, Anthony Coppola, had conveniently left to take a walk. Two masked gunmen in fedoras and aviator sunglasses entered from the hotel lobby and opened fire with 32 and 38 caliber handguns, approximately 10 shots. Bullets struck Anastasia in the head, back, hip, and hand. In a final moment, the dying boss lunged from his chair toward the mirror, apparently attacking his killer's reflections in confusion. He collapsed and died on the barbershop floor. One weapon was recovered from a litter basket nearby. 14 witnesses were present. 100 detectives were assigned to the case. No one was ever charged. The identity of the actual shooters is still disputed. Joe Gallo of the Prohibition family later boasted about a barbershop quintet, while Gambino capo-turned-informant Michael De Leonardo gave a different account to the government, naming Stephen Armoni, Stephen Gramata, and Arnold Wittenberg, a crew of Lower East Side drug dealers affiliated with Gambino. Bis Jerry Capezzi's Gangland News identified Joseph Biondo as the organizer on Gambino's behalf. What isn't disputed across any credible source is that Carlo Gambino was the key internal conspirator who facilitated the killing from within Anastasia's own organization. 3 weeks later, on November 14, 1957, over 60 Mafia bosses gathered at Joseph Barber's estate at 625 McFall Road in Appalachian, New York, to formalize Gambino's elevation and divide Anastasia's holdings. New York State Police Sergeant Edgar Croswell, who'd been monitoring Barber's property, set up roadblocks. The meeting scattered. Gambino was present and was detained along with dozens of others. 20 attendees were convicted of conspiring to obstruct justice in January of 1959. Every conviction was overturned on appeal. Gambino walked away clean. The final piece was Vito Genovese. According to Selwyn Robb's 5 Families, Gambino, along with Lucky Luciano from exile in Italy, Frank Costello, Meyer Lansky, and Tommy Lucchese, conspired to frame Genovese on narcotics charges. They reportedly paid a Puerto Rican drug dealer named Nelson Cantalopes approximately $100,000 to turn state's witness and implicate Genovese in a drug conspiracy. On April 17, 1959, Genovese was sentenced to 15 years at Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. He died behind bars on February 14, 1969. As NYPD Detective Ralph Salerno observed, anyone who understood the protocol and insulation procedures of the Mafia would find it almost unbelievable that a boss would be directly involved in a drug operation the way Cantalopes described. Gambino understood that. He counted on it. With Anastasia dead and Genovese imprisoned, Carlo Gambino stood alone at the summit of American organized crime. At the top level of the organized crime underworld, avoid ever being meaningfully imprisoned. His complete arrest record spans 5 decades and contains exactly 4 entries. 1930, arrested in Lawrence, Massachusetts as a suspicious person, dismissed. Brockton, Massachusetts, larceny charge, dropped after $1,000 restitution. The 1937 Philadelphia case with its disputed outcome. And March 23, 1970, arrested while driving with Catherine at 14th Avenue and 48th Street in Brooklyn, charged with conspiracy to hijack armored cars. Prosecutors alleged he was sitting on $3 to $5 million in illicit earnings and had been planning a $25 million robbery of the United States Trucking Company. He was brought to FBI headquarters at 201 East 69th Street and arraigned before United States Commissioner Earl N. Bishop, released on $75,000 bail. Manhattan federal judge Marvin E. Frankel indefinitely stayed the case due to Gambino's deteriorating health. The case died with him. 4 entries, half a century. the most powerful crime boss in the country. He never discussed business on the telephone. He communicated orders through nods, hand gestures, and facial expressions, rendering audio surveillance useless. In one recorded meeting between Gambino, underboss Agnello Della Croce, and consigliere Joseph Biondo, captured by an FBI surveillance van parked outside his Brooklyn home in December of 1972, the only word spoken was "frog legs," uttered by Biondo, to which Gambino simply nodded. FBI agents reported that Gambino and associate Antonio Mangotti communicated without speaking a single word to each other for 2 years. On May 29, 1962. FBI memo from the New York field office acknowledged the difficulty directly, because stating it was imperative that every effort be made to establish highly confidential coverage of Gambino in view of his position as a commission member and his obvious importance as a top leader. They tried. They couldn't get close. The buffer system did the rest. Gambino gave orders to his underboss and consigliere. They passed instructions to approximately 25 capos. Those capos directed over 500 soldiers. Those soldiers managed thousands of associates. No direct evidentiary link between Carlo Gambino and any specific criminal act could ever be established by prosecutors. His anti-drug policy, deal and die, served a ruthlessly practical purpose beyond any moral posturing. Drug charges carried extreme sentences that motivated members to cooperate with authorities. By keeping the family focused on gambling, loan sharking, hijacking, labor racketeering, and extortion, Gambino minimized the risk that any soldier would face enough pressure to flip. The timing of his career was itself a shield. J. Edgar Hoover denied the Mafia's very existence until the Appalachian raid forced his hand in 1957. Before that raid, the FBI's New York office assigned 400 agents to investigate communist subversives and only 4 to organized crime. The Racketeer, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations Act wasn't passed until 1970. And wasn't widely used by prosecutors until the 1980s. But electronic surveillance evidence wasn't admissible in federal court until Congress authorized judicial supervision in 1968. Gambino's most active decades, the 40s through the 60s, predated every major tool that would later be used to dismantle what he built. Vito Genovese received 15 years for narcotics conspiracy in 1959. Carmine Galante got 20 years for drug trafficking in 1962. Frank Costello served 5 years for tax evasion in 1954. Jimmy Hoffa received 13 years in 1964. Gambino outlasted every one of them, free and in command. And then there was the heart. Deportation proceedings were initiated in 1953 on the grounds of his illegal 1921 entry. They stalled for years due to what the government described as constant hospitalizations. On December 9, 1957, days after Appalachian, immigration agents called his home and were told he wasn't there. Without a warrant, they couldn't search. Gambino had checked into Flower Hospital on 5th Avenue and 106th Street for surgery under Dr. Samuel A. Thompson. Hoover himself wrote in a memo that Gambino's chances of living were not good. In 1966, an immigration inquiry officer sent Gambino 11 written questions about his criminal activities, his associates, his attendance at Appalachian, and his finances. He answered only 2, partially. He refused the other 9. A 1967 deportation order was upheld by the Second Circuit in 1970 and by the Supreme Court the same year. When the government tried to execute the order, Gambino was rushed to a hospital after suffering a massive heart attack. Italy showed no enthusiasm for accepting him back. As FBI files noted with barely concealed frustration, Gotti. His ticker always flared up right before he was due to appear before immigration hearings or court proceedings. The heart condition was genuine, the 30 pills a day were real, the surgeries were documented. But the timing was a weapon. He turned his own dying body into a legal shield that no prosecutor could penetrate. This was the discipline of disappearance, the principle that the most powerful position in organized crime is the one that generates no evidence of its own existence. Gambino didn't just avoid conviction, he avoided visibility itself. He made himself into a ghost who ran an empire, and the empire was vast. If you're still with me on this one, a subscribe would mean a lot, because the empire he ran from that silence was the largest criminal machine in the country. At its peak under Gambino's leadership, the family maintained an estimated 500 maid members and over 1,000 associates, though an FBI list from November 1969 identified only 233 by name and acknowledged the count as incomplete. The FBI estimated annual revenue at approximately $500 million. Gambino's personal net worth at death was estimated at $70 million, roughly $400 million in today's dollars. The family's revenue streams formed an interlocking web of legitimate and criminal enterprise that touched virtually every sector of New York's economy. Labor racketeering was the foundation. The Gambinos controlled the International Longshoremen's Association, particularly Local 1814 in Brooklyn and Staten Island, where Anthony Anastasia, Albert Anastasia's brother, who spelled his surname differently, served as president from 1932 until his death in 1963. Through the ILA, the family extracted tribute from shipping companies, kickbacks from union members, and revenue from no-show jobs and looted benefit funds. A 2005 Department of Justice RICO filing confirmed that since the late 1950s, the Gambino and Genovese families had shared control of various ports, with the Gambinos primarily exercising influence at commercial shipping terminals in Brooklyn and Staten Island. The garment district was jointly controlled with the Lucchese family through a trucking monopoly that operated in plain sight for decades. Carlo's eldest son, Thomas, owned 4 trucking companies that charged rates 40% above market, and every garment manufacturer in Manhattan paid, because the alternative was having fabric deliveries mysteriously delayed, damaged, or disappeared. The alliance between the Gambino and Lucchese families was cemented on the day Thomas married Frances Lucchese, daughter of boss Tommy Lucchese, in 1962 at a wedding attended by over 1,000 guests. Carlo presented Lucchese with a $30,000 gift. In return, Lucchese gave Gambino a share of his rackets at what was then Idlewild Airport, renamed JFK in 1963. In a detail that captures how deeply the family had penetrated legitimate industry, the garment trade later honored Thomas Gambino as its Man of the Year in 1981. JFK Airport cargo theft was another major profit center. The Fatico crew, which included a young John Gotti, specialized in hijacking trucks carrying valuable shipments from the airport through Brooklyn. The family's airport operations contributed to the Lufthansa heist of December 11th, 1978, primarily a Lucchese operation under Jimmy Burke that netted $5.875 million in cash and jewelry, the largest cash robbery in American history at that time. Gambino family representative Paolo Lacastri participated in the heist crew, securing a $200,000 cut for the family. The stolen loot was transferred at a warehouse with connections to Gotti's crew. The Concrete Club, a cartel of contractors selected by the commission, controlled all construction contracts in the New York metropolitan area, valued between $2 million and $15 million, extracting a 2% kickback on every contract. Paul Castellano supervised the family's construction interests through control of Teamsters Local 282, which supplied workers to pour concrete at every major building project in the city. His son Philip, ran Scara Mix Concrete Corporation, which held a near monopoly on concrete supply in Staten Island. Gambino's role on the commission was that of unofficial chairman of the board. After Genovese's imprisonment and Lucchese's death from a brain tumor on July 13, 1967, no one could challenge him. He forged alliances nationwide: New England, New Jersey, New Orleans, Florida, Chicago, California, Pennsylvania, Detroit. He partnered with Meyer Lansky to control gambling operations in Cuba and the Bahamas. When Joseph Bonanno and Joseph Magliocco plotted in 1963 to assassinate Gambino and Lucchese, it was Joseph Colombo, the very man assigned to carry out the hit, who betrayed the conspiracy to the intended targets. The commission stripped Bonanno of his position. Gambino rewarded Colombo by backing his elevation as boss of the Profaci family. Behind all of this machinery, the waterfront, the garment trucks, the airport cargo, the concrete, the nationwide alliances, lived a man with a prominent aquiline nose, a permanent friendly grin that one source described as a tool to disarm detractors, and a walk through his Gravesend neighborhood that looked like any other old Sicilian grandfather buying vegetables. He visited Ferrara's on Grand Street in Little Italy for pastries. He spoke with a heavy Sicilian accent and conducted business in Italian. He quoted Machiavelli, that to be a lion and a fox is optimum in this life, because you need to be a fox to recognize traps and a lion to scare away the wolves. His most famous attributed saying captured everything about his philosophy of survival. A fish with his mouth closed never gets caught. Another, judges, lawyers, and politicians have a license to steal. We don't need one. Catherine died on August 6, 1971. The loss reportedly devastated him. She was buried at Saint-Jean Cemetery in Queens. Their 4 children had followed different paths. Thomas deep into the family's garment district operations, the others in varying degrees of proximity to the life their father built. The Massapequa summer house at 34 Club Drive, purchased from his trusted capo Ettore Zappi, who lived next door, was somewhat more indulgent than the Brooklyn home, a 2-story brick house at the end of its cul-de-sac overlooking the bay, with marble statues on the front lawn. Not it was, according to one account, perhaps his only indulgence. One anecdote captures the quiet menace that lived beneath the friendly grin. In October of 1974, Colombo family capo Dominic Sciallo, known as the King of Coney Island, encountered Gambino at a restaurant. Drunk and belligerent, Sciallo publicly insulted the old boss. Gambino said nothing, remained calm. Sciallo was never seen alive again. His body was later found encased in concrete. The question of whether Gambino inspired Vito Corleone in The Godfather has a clear answer: partially. Mario Puzo himself stated he wrote the novel entirely from research, having never met a real gangster, and credited his mother's wisdom, ruthlessness, and unconquerable love for her family as the primary human inspiration. Frank Costello is widely considered the strongest single model, strategic, diplomatic, known as the Prime Minister of the mob. With a raspy voice, Brando reportedly studied. But the parallels with Gambino are undeniable. Both were Sicilian immigrants who rose through cunning rather than brutality. Both led families with 3 sons and a daughter. Both died of heart attacks. Both discouraged narcotics. And both lived in calculated modesty despite vast power. The character is a composite. The power was Carlo's alone. Before his death, Gambino made the decision that would unravel everything he'd spent 50 years building. He named his brother-in-law Paul Castellano as successor, bypassing underboss Agnello Della Croce, the fearsome street enforcer who had loyally served as Gambino's number 2 since 1965. Gambino's reasoning was dynastic and strategic. He believed the family's future lay in white-collar enterprise, in construction, food distribution, and Wall Street infiltration, and Castellano, who ran the legitimate-facing operations from his palatial estate on Tot Hill in Staten Island, was better suited to that vision than a man whose talents were violence and the respect it commanded. Della Croce, imprisoned at the time for tax evasion, couldn't contest the move. According to Sammy Gravano's account and Peter Moss's underboss, Gambino tried to steer the family in a new direction, favoring a more sophisticated effort to dominate construction, trucking, food distribution, garbage disposal, and even to infiltrate Wall Street. Gambino chose dynasty over merit, blood over competence, silence over the street. It was the most Gambino decision he ever made, and it was catastrophic. Was choosing family over the man who'd earned it a fatal flaw, or the only choice a man like Carlo Gambino, who married his own cousin to bind 2 mafia bloodlines, who placed his sons in the family's most profitable rackets, who understood power as something inherited rather than seized, could have made? Tell me what you think in the comments. The succession was confirmed at a meeting on November 24, 1976, with Della Croce present. Castellano offered a compromise. Della Croce would remain underboss and run the street operations independently. The deal effectively split the Gambino family into 2 rival factions, a fault line running through the heart of the organization. Della Croce held the peace through force of personality and respect for nearly a decade. When he died of lung cancer on December 2, 1985, the restraint died with him. Castellano's decision to skip Della Croce's wake was the final insult to the street faction. 14 days later, on December 16, 1985, Paul Castellano and his driver Tommy Bellotti were shot dead outside Spark Steakhouse on East 46th Street in Manhattan. John Gotti, Della Croce's protege, a man who craved the spotlight the way Gambino craved its absence, had ordered the hit. Thomas Gambino, Carlo's eldest son, arrived at the scene moments after the murders. Gotti seized the throne, transformed the family into a media circus, courted cameras, gave sidewalk press conferences outside the Ravenite Social Club, and earned the nickname the Teflon Don. He was everything Carlo Gambino had spent a lifetime refusing to be: loud, visible, reckless, equotable. In 1992, his own underboss, Sammy Gravano, turned government witness and buried him with testimony that led to a life sentence without parole. Gotti died of throat cancer in a federal prison hospital in 2002. Everything Carlo Gambino had built on silence, John Gotti destroyed with noise. The discipline of disappearance required a successor who understood it. Gambino chose a man who did. The problem was that every other man in the family didn't. The wake was held on the 16th and 17th of October at the Cusimano and Russo Funeral Home. The funeral mass took place on Monday, October 18, 1976, at 10 in the morning at the Church of Our Lady of Grace at Avenue W and East 4th Street in Brooklyn. The coffin was bronze, valued at $7,000. Several hundred mourners attended. Some accounts claim over 2,000, including police officers, judges, and politicians who came to pay respects they could never have acknowledged publicly. The procession included 13 limousines, approximately a dozen private cars, and a flower car. Plainclothes police and FBI agents mingled outside, photographing attendees, still gathering intelligence on a man who had defeated them, even in death. St. John's Cemetery, Middle Village, Queens. The Cloister Building, a quiet, enclosed mausoleum space, unremarkable from the outside. Nas Carlo is entombed beside Catherine, who preceded him by 5 years. Down the same corridors lie Lucky Luciano, Vito Genovese, Joe Profaci, and more than 10 other men who shaped the same world he did. Most of them died in prison, in exile, or in violence. The house at 2230 Ocean Parkway sold in September of 2024 for $4.4 million, a sum that has everything to do with the name of the man who lived there and nothing to do with the house itself. The barbershop inside the Park Sheraton, where Anastasia bled out in chair number 4, is a Starbucks. The original barber chair sold at auction for $7,000 and sits behind glass at the Mob Museum in Las Vegas. Thomas Gambino, the last surviving son, died on October 3, 2023 at 94, having reinvented himself as a philanthropist supporting Northwell Health's Cohen Children's Medical Center. At the time of a 1992 New York Times report, he held at least $75 million in cash, bonds, and blue-chip stock. Joseph died on February 20th, 2020. Carlo Jr. died in 2019. Phyllis died on February 19th, 2007. The Gambino crime family still operates. A 2024 New York Attorney General bust documented a Gambino-run gambling operation handling $22.7 million in bets and a loan sharking ring generating $500,000 per week on Staten Island. But it is a shadow of what Carlo built, gutted by decades of RICO prosecutions and the very cooperating witnesses his anti-drug policy was designed to prevent. His marker in the cloister carries nothing that announces who lies inside. The man who ran the most powerful criminal organization in the Western Hemisphere for nearly 2 decades is indistinguishable in death from every other name on every other wall in the building. The fish kept his mouth closed. Even the stone says nothing.